Hello there, Steve here in Sydney of the Gnosis website truebluehealer.com. I've got a real treat for you here. It's kind of like the surprise ending to a story, and it's going to answer a whole lot of questions for you, questions you probably never thought to ask. Sometimes you just don't know what questions to ask, and this is going to be one of those cases. And the question is going to be exactly what is a secular humanist. This is about skeptics again and what motivates them to go head-kicking around the internet. Why do they do this? And it's a historical denouement, an unfolding of a story you probably wouldn't imagine, and it's quite a surprise, quite a revelation, and I do invite you to take notes from it. Write down key names, there's about 4 or 5 of them, and go searching on your own to check what this article says. It's a very engaging article. I made into a robot read thing, and you'll suddenly see what you've really been up against. It was withheld from you for decades of your life, while you've been on the internet at least. And this has all come out of the book The Fall of the House of Skeptics by Chris Carter. He supplied a surprise reference which I went following, and I found this wonderful article, and it shows you how much you can be fooled. And people inside organisations may not know who they're actually working for, and it's kind of surprising. And there's some authoritative opinions added by organisations and people along the way, and it's quite an exciting story.
A resounding yes to the question posed here. Has CSICOP lost the 30 Years' War? Part 5, by Guy Lyon Playfair. Headline: CSICOP's Stalinist godfather, Corliss Lamont. CSICOP's single parent was the American Humanist Association. Paul Kurtz, editor of its journal The Humanist, becoming one of CSICOP's first co-chairmen. One might assume, therefore, that its aims were similar to those of its progenitor. Yet what exactly is humanism? The American Heritage Dictionary defines it as a system of thought that centers on human beings and their values, capacities, and worth, which sounds harmless enough. However, humanism seems to be one of those words of which Humpty Dumpty memorably remarked, "When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less," and choices of meaning within the Humanist Association membership have ranged from the tolerant and open-minded to the bigoted and dogmatic. An example of the former was given by Humanist Association President, in the early 50s, Lloyd Moraine. Humanism is distinguished from authoritarian systems, fascism, communism, in that it offers no absolutely certain truth. Humanism would be false in itself if it drew up a final and dogmatic set of propositions and demanded that they should be accepted. Humanism as the next step, 1954. Oliver Reiser, another humanist prominent, in the 50s, expressed an equally open-minded and prescient attitude towards at least one area of the paranormal. It is becoming clear with each passing decade that the explanation of psi phenomena requires a completely integrated philosophy, one which, when it appears, will seem quite fantastic from the viewpoint of present-day science. He added that physicists were getting used to forces quite unfamiliar, and were already conditioned to revolutionary discoveries which upset old ideas. Psi phenomena could be but one more upheaval in a century of upheavals. The integration of human knowledge, 1958. So far so good, yet other attitudes in the Humanist Association soon prevailed, and psi phenomena, telepathy, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, and precognition, soon became taboo, as did even the study of them. As early as 1955, The Humanist, Volume 15, Number 4, published a scurrilous attack on the most distinguished parapsychologist of the time, J.B. Rhine, virtually accusing him of being mentally deranged. How come this sudden U-turn in humanist attitude? A persuasive explanation is to be found in a 28-page typewritten document entitled The American Humanist Association. Its resistance to parapsychology, quantum consciousness, and paraphysical processes. The authors are anonymous, and there is no heading other than the words Report Number 2, June 15, 1977. It is written in the dry, deadpan prose favored by writers of reports for intelligence agencies, one or other of which, perhaps the Central Intelligence Agency, which was taking an active interest in Psi in the 70s, can be assumed to have commissioned it. Who else would? Intelligence Report Number 2, June 15, 1977. The American Humanist Association, its resistance to parapsychology, quantum consciousness, and paraphysical processes. Abstract. The theory of general relativity and quantum theory have provided science with avenues to concretely investigate parapsychological, psychotronic processes. Science in general, however, remains indiscriminately opposed to parapsychological processes and resistant to investigation of them. In 1977, the intelligence report then continues. A broad survey of this resistance reveals that much of it originates within the American Humanist Society, whose publications, seminars, and behind-the-scenes activities tend to influence scientific thinkers on numerous matters. It is also alleged that principal members, like Paul Kurtz, of the American Humanist Society have visited important scientific institutions and potential government funding agencies in an attempt to depress high-level interest in parapsychological research. High-level lobbying. Indeed, for a privately owned organization, currently, 1974 to 1977, the American Humanist Association appears to be waging an all-out attack on the several areas that constitute the greater areas of research of quantum non-material processes, in human consciousness, and non-material processes. This attack is seen by the present authors as prejudicial to the advancement of science in general, and to discovery in parapsychology in particular. While the Humanist Association claims to establish not another set of dogmas but a living framework, its overt resistance to parapsychology is highly indicative of a dogmatic stance not dissimilar to the dominant religious and social methods of the Middle Ages, and this comparison, seemingly dramatic, is warranted. The literature of humanism and the history of the present Humanist Association in the USA has been subject to extensive scrutiny. Paul Kurtz pictured, it is discovered that the Humanist Association is not generally representative of creative humanist thought in general, that Paul Kurtz's Humanist Association undoubtedly supports a psychopolitical dogma that attempts to limit science to materialism, and actively engages in propaganda favorable to the Sovietization of the United States, and that it devalues individualism, creativity, consciousness, and man's superior mental attributes in favor of the establishment of the Marxian collective. The overall activities of the Humanist Association therefore extend beyond the scope of this report, but the anti-psychic, anti-parapsychological attitude of the Humanist Association cannot be considered apart from its psychopolitical goals. Report Number 2, June 15, 1977. The intelligence report is thoroughly researched and extensively referenced, the authors having surveyed the entire production of the Humanist since its inception in 1941 through May-June of 1977. In an effort to fathom the resistance of the Humanist Association to paranormal functioning. According to them, even the most open-minded review of the written production of the Humanist Association and the committee, that is, CSICOP, easily established that some 80% is negative propaganda against parapsychology and individuals involved in it, while the policy of the Humanist Association journal had clearly and inexorably led to establishing the fundamentals of Marxist materialism, and had equally inexorably sought the disestablishment of any non-material possibilities, even those of quantum theory. The 1977 intelligence report authors had no difficulty in naming the most likely source of this hardline policy. Discussions with past and present Humanist Association members, and a thorough review of all their literature indicate that the Humanist Association, since 1948, has been dominated by the beliefs, financial influence, and political orientation of one Corliss Lamont. Corliss, who some may ask. Corliss Lamont, 1902-95, was a radical philosopher, author, civil rights campaigner, and wealthy heir. His father was a partner in the J.P. Morgan banking firm. He was also a lifelong admirer of Stalin. He made the first of several visits to the Soviet Union in the early 30s, and wrote glowingly of his experiences in the New World of the 20th century. Such optimistic views were not uncommon at the time, being shared by the likes of George Bernard Shaw and Andrei Gide, but they were less common in the 1970s following the Soviet invasions of Hungary and Czechoslovakia. However, the authors of Intelligence Report No. 2 noted that a survey of Lamont's writings up through 1974 reflects his beliefs, and he has not shifted from them significantly since his first travels to the Soviet Union. He was, they said, an unabashed admirer of Soviet thinking whose writings included a book hopefully entitled You Might Like Socialism, A Way of Life for Modern Man, 1939, 4 books, and 9 pamphlets on Soviet matters, one of which, The Myth of Soviet Aggression, was published just 3 years before Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest. He ran for the U.S. Senate for the American Labor Party, 1952, and the Independent Socialist Party, 1958. He was named Humanist of the Year in 1977 and President Emeritus of the Humanist Association in 1992. Corliss Lamont, pictured, the notorious Special Committee on Un-American Activities may have got it right for once when it named Corliss Lamont as probably the most persistent propagandist for the Soviet Union to be found anywhere in the United States. What he chose the word humanism to mean was clearly that of the Marxist dialectical materialist variety, neither more nor less, in which there is no room for any kind of parapsychological phenomenon, or indeed non-materialism of any kind. Lamont's influence on the American Humanists Association was considerable, according to the authors of Report No. 2. It is alleged that his contributions may total some 50% of the total budget. Moreover, he seems to have been responsible for the distinctly Kremlin-like atmosphere that built up within the humanist. Prominent officers of the AHA remain prominent only insofar as they conform to Lamont's policies. It is alleged by individuals who claim that they have been forced out of the inner functioning of the Humanist Association, that there does exist within the AHA party lines, and that nonconformists to it are maneuvered or forced by covert means to the sidelines, or expelled from the association altogether. The departures of co-founder Marcello Truzzi and Dennis Rollins, the Mars Effect whistleblower, shortly after this was written, suggest that CSICOP was towing the same Stalinist party line. Indeed, to this day CSICOP can be described as, in effect, the militant wing of the Humanist Association, acting as what author Brian Inglis has called scientism's hitman. Corliss Lamont was perfectly entitled to use the Humanist as a Marxist propaganda sheet. It was courageous of him to do so. In fact, in the McCarthy era Brian Inglis wrote, CSICOP, unpublished MS, c.1985. But it was surely unhealthy for CSICOP to play his game. And how dirtily it was played. He gives examples of dirty tricks used by the hitman, including smear campaigns against parapsychologists associated, even distantly, to religious cults, harassing phone calls to scientists sympathetic toward psi research, and that classic ploy of the debater, who has run out of arguments, the ad hominem attack. Such antics prompted Bernard Dixon, the generally skeptical editor of New Scientist, to issue a rebuke which, sadly, needs repeating. Impatient rejection of the bizarre is counterproductive and antipathetic to the spirit of science. Parapsychologists ask for nothing more than to have their experiments, their methods, and their data examined without distortion or misrepresentation, without prejudice or predisposition, says Richard Broughton, a former president of the Parapsychological Association, which is affiliated to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, in his book Parapsychology, The Controversial Science, 1991. But somewhere along the line CSICOP abandoned the objectively critical spirit of science and adopted a stop-at-any-cost approach towards any topic that it deems off-limits to science. He adds science is a marvelously self-correcting system. It does not need vigilantes to guard the gates. Leaving aside the question of whether CSICOP ever had such an objectively critical spirit, it seems clear that with the arrival on the humanist scene of Corliss Lamont, the Humanist Association took a distinctly stop-at-any-cost approach to any phenomenon, or rather claim for a phenomenon not explicable in Marxist materialist terms. Randi's prize there explained. Randi is simply an employee of Stalinist Corliss Lamont. As for CSICOP, it has not severed the umbilical cord that links it to the Stalinist Humanist Association. In his letter of resignation from CSICOP, October 29, 1977. Its co-founder Marcello Truzzi made it clear how strong that link was. I see no way in which my original goals for our committee can be met. These goals included objective inquiry prior to judgment, and clear separation between the policies of the committee and the American Humanist Association and the Humanist magazine, edited by Falkert. 20 years later, within a few years of his premature and widely lamented death in 2003, aged 67, he was considerably more forthright in an email, December 28, 1997, to British researcher Steve Hume. You asked me if CSICOP really does block inquiry. I very much think it has, and still does. This to me is the main objection I have to so much CSICOP does, and the way they do it, by acting not as mere attorneys for the orthodox, but also pretending to be judge and jury for science. People are interested in paranormal experiences not, as Russell Targ once remarked, because they are reading about them, but because they are having them. And they would like them explained. There was hope in 1976 that CSICOP was about to do this, or at least make an honest effort to do so. But it did not. CSICOP, as its co-founder Marcello Truzzi admitted with his characteristic honesty in the message quoted above, has increasingly come to resemble what it may always have intended to be. From the outset of its 30 years war that followed Truzzi's resignation, the campaign for the suppression of investigation of claims of the paranormal, and CSICOP's owner-operator, Corliss Lamont, was probably the most persistent propagandist for the Soviet Union to be found anywhere in the United States. So dear viewers, that's the man who has been biting our ankles and head-kicking religious people and ESP proponents since the internet began. Through CSICOP, James Randi's Prize, Richard Wiseman, Michael Shermer, Susan Blackmore and JREF.
So now that you've seen that little expose there, I do invite you to go and check up the keywords, the people like Paul Kurtz and Corliss Lamont. Did he really exist? Check it up. There's tons of stuff on Google. He laid a deliberate trail all of his life in the media. He created that organisation, the American Humanist Association, so that it would give him awards, basked in his own glory. A bit of self-worship there. But now you suddenly realise what the fury is behind what CSICOP has always been doing, they being the military wing of the American Humanist Society, which is a bunch of Stalinist communists in disguise. So why the furious activity to try and discredit why would they do this? You've got to think what motivates them to try and discredit psychic phenomena, quantum physics. They want to discredit quantum physics and stop the American government from investing in that, looking into that, studying that. It seems like a boots and all, stop them at any cost, is the phrase used in that article piece you've just been looking at. And the obvious answer is that a 200-year-old political philosophy is killed by discoveries in psychic phenomena, because they all point toward one thing. As soon as you can prove telepathy and contact with dead, that is afterlife, you kill communism instantly, because it's based on the absolute assumption of pure physicalism, that you are an animal and you will die and that's it. The simplest explanation for your existence is used by the communists, and they use that to justify using Pavlov's conditioning techniques to teach you and train you at school. You might well ask why Americans in 1956, Eisenhower wanted to amalgamate the American school system with the Russian school system. But that's another story. And again in later decades it happened that there was a deliberate paralleling and cross-pollination between the Russian and the American school systems, which is hard to understand. Think about Give it some thought, people. It's worth giving it some thought. So there we have a ready explanation for the furious head-kicking that's been going on the internet the last 10-15 years, and even before that, from the 1976 inauguration of CSICOP, the organisation which fell flat on its face in horror, discovering that, golly, there's actually something in astrology. It was statistically proven by Gauquelin, a Frenchman. By the way, he was a skeptic. He didn't like astrologers either, but he was an honest skeptic, because he kept writing off a lot of things believed by astrologers, but he proved some of them actually quite true, and he wrote about it very openly and honestly. And that bait was mistakenly grabbed by CSICOP, who thought they could easily discredit it, and that's their first operation, where they hid the results in a drawer because they didn't want the research to go any further, and Dennis Rawlins blew the whistle on them. That was the first great battle they lost, trying to maintain materialism as the dominant thought process in the Western world. And it's been a downhill run ever since then. I really got no pity for them because of the attitude they have and the way they treat people. What did you think about this guy you've never heard of, Corliss, Lamont, a fabulously rich man who had a religious adoration for Stalinist Russia and all the dreadful things it did, that he was one of those kind of religious apologists for everything that they did over there. And in the early 1930s, when Corliss Lamont was visiting the Soviet Union, he wasn't told, most likely, about the Holodomor, which was in fact a massacre of 6 million people via starvation. Kulaks, Russian for farmer, were literally starved to death by Stalin in the early 1930s because they wouldn't return their land to the ownership of it to the centralised Russian government. Now, that wasn't showcased at all to Corliss Lamont when he went on his fabulous trips through Russia. Also, he's intentionally blind, like a religious devotee that we see in so many religious people, and I'm not really down on religions that much, but Corliss Lamont obviously ignored Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who pointed out through population studies that 1/3 of the Russian population ended up either dead or in the Gulag Archipelago prison, in freezing prison camps. All that was ignored by Corliss Lamont, advocating the whole world should become a Stalinist labour camp. How could he be totally unaware of all these things? Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he wasn't totally unaware of it. Maybe he just pretended he didn't know. Maybe he just pretended he didn't know. It's noted by the American intelligence group, who did a study from 1941 to 1977, that this Corliss Lamont character never changed his adoration for Stalin and communism generally, despite the invasion of Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and despite all the horrors of Stalinism being of mass graves and that sort of thing, massacres and huge sacrifices in World War II that weren't necessary, and all sorts of things like that. That Corliss Lamont never blinked an eye through all of that. He just kept saying the whole world should become a Stalinist paradise. Now, it's kind of hard to understand why anyone so fabulously rich would even become a left-wing philosopher and advocate spreading all the money round, but I don't think he did that. He actually sought to really turn everything into a labour camp everywhere he went. He wanted America and the Western world to become a Russian Gulag Archipelago, as far as I can tell, and he campaigned for that. Now, what came along was the up-and-coming, that was foreseen, the up-and-coming discoveries of quantum mechanics, non-physical things, and telepathy in particular. And so they launched this all-out attempt to stop the US government from studying psychic phenomena. And that's described so aptly in the in that little piece you just went through there. And on a recent documentary about Stalingrad, which was named a very famous battle in World War II, was fought there, the final battle that stopped the German advance. Local residents now living in Stalingrad, which has been changed to something else, Volgograd, to try and get rid of the personality cult that was running Russia for many decades. They asked people in the street, how would are you happy now that finally Stalin is gone? And surprisingly, there are numerous contradictions from people in the street. To the camera, they say they'd rather go back to having Stalin in charge and doing all his mass slaughters and that sort of thing, because Stalingrad, named after him, got the very best treatment and the best government services and that sort of thing, and the best attention from the rest of the economy, you see. So, they talk about the good old days when Stalin was in charge and how wonderful it really was. They have terribly selective memories. It is most distressing that people can be so unplugged from reality. It's sometimes hard to believe that a group of people, or really it's a very small group of people in a pilot organisation, and all they have is a lot of money. But money does buy media time and get books sold and that sort of thing, and in prominent advertising positions gets people access to media all over the place. So it's hard to believe that a movement that seems so innocent, this demands logical thinking and critical thinking, could actually deep down be motivated by the most dastardly intentions toward anyone they can get their hands on. And I've had personal experience with this in a most surprising way. When I was about 14, I was living in Brisbane, a city of Australia. My father was a tradesman in the heavy steel industry, and he took an interest in the union and getting better working conditions, and he became a union official, you see. So what? You know, lots of people do that. Shop steward, union official. It's the way to go. Anyway, what he noticed was that he started drinking, of course, with the union officials. That was mandatory. And he noticed that after a few drinks, these union officials in Brisbane started talking to him and telling stories to each other, reminiscing about their annual holidays in Moscow, you see. Which really surprised my father, that Queenslanders would ever go to Moscow for a holiday. It sounds ridiculous, you see. So he kept listening, just kept listening and agreeing with everything they said to see what happened, you see. And he slowly realised he was being groomed. They became more and more open about Marxism, Leninism, you see, and how the downfall of capitalism. This was at about 1966, okay, height of the Cold War, and they were sort of grooming him and introducing him to the lexicon of the Marxist dialectric business, the workers control the means of production, all that crap, and the downfall of the capitalist system is nigh, that kind of thing, and soon the workers will be on top, and the evil controllers of capitalism will have all their money, leave it off them, and we'll all be rich. And when the revolution comes, you'll be in on the ground floor, they told my dad, you see, quite seriously. And the drunker they got, the worse it got, you see. And he ultimately ended up being groomed by the CEO of the union, who used to talk all this Stalinist crap all the time to my dad, you see. And my dad listened to it and listened to it and listened to it. And the CEO used to drink a bit, and he'd sit there on the veranda of his penthouse with my dad, trying to talk him into going to Moscow for training, you see, trade union training in Moscow. And the thing that mostly annoyed my dad was the utter hypocrisy and like the double layers of lies these communist guys were using. Because what he was saying was, while I really do believe in all this stuff about the workers should control everything and the money should be shared out, blah blah blah, you know, distribution of wealth, standard communist line. He was also boasting between drinks about how much of the Brisbane property scene that he owned. He said, I own that block of flats over there. I've got 11 houses in that block there. I own a car park over there. This is all in the inner city of Brisbane, you see. Which made my dad deeply suspicious as to where all the workers' money was going in this union. Was it going to just fund real estate junkets and trips to Moscow for the top leadership of the union, you see? So this sort of thing does happen in reality. It happened in Brisbane, Australia in about 1966. And my father listened long enough till he was really sick to the back teeth with it, and one day he took a big risk and he got up on the stage. He was sitting on the stage with the executive members, and he stood up at the microphone and he just said to about 100 workers who were attending the union meeting in the town hall, he just said, I want you guys to know that most of your union officials go to Moscow for training, and they got no interest at all in your workers' rights or improving your workers' conditions. They're really interested in ruining capitalism, and that's why we're having so many strikes. They're trying to send the heavy industry, the metal steel industry in Brisbane, broke. And this caused uproar and that sort of thing. The microphone was turned off, etc., all that sort of stuff. The meeting was stopped. And within a week, he lost his job, and we were forced to leave Brisbane forever. My father couldn't get a job in Brisbane ever again after that, so they ruined his employment opportunity, which is sort of reminiscent of the Stalinist behaviour that you read about in that article I just showed you, that Robot Read article. So it can happen to you too. That was in about 1966. So I think I've bent your ear long enough now. What I can do is put some links below this video and a few keywords at the end of this, but I think you've got enough to think about. It may come as a great surprise to you, this video and the knowledge therein. So I'll leave you now. Steve here in Sydney. Ta-ta.